Hello everyone. It's a pleasure to talk again. See now, Lambo, he's been making some content on Draft recently. The Dream Fairy Dragon Steel Tour, the Gamer Firewater Grass Tour. I've liked them. But it really got me thinking, what even is a Steel type anyway? In Draft specifically. I mean, I think in Steel type on Ladder is just put as many of them on your team as possible, you know. I mean, I would be perfectly happy having a Torv, Drill, Melmetal team. And, like, you know, in Draft, you can't really do that, because that's 3 fire weaknesses. And, well, that's the only weakness they share, but still 2 ground weaknesses, 2 flying weaknesses. You know, either way. What does a Steel type mean? Well, if you look at the resistance chart, I think generally Steel types should, if not be reliant on their defensive typing of being a Steel type, they should always, like, have uses for it. You don't need to be as defensive as something like a Corviknight, something like a, you know, defensive Jirachi, Empoleon, maybe Scizor to an extent, defensive Aegislash. You can be a Pokemon like Excadrill, which just has incredibly good resistances, good enough bulk, to just be able to threaten things out, do what it needs to do. And that's what I think makes Steel types so valuable. Because they have so many useful resistances to so many strong types, specifically usually it's going to be Dragon, Fairy, Flying, Ice, and Rock are going to be your main ones, Psychic as well to an extent. It's very, you know, important that you have one. I think out of the types that you can draft, I think Steel is probably the most consistent type, and I feel like you're never going to go wrong with Steel type. But what makes Steels different from one another? Because I've got like 7 or 8, 9 actually Tribalian Steel types here. What actually makes them different? Well, I mean, some of them have Rocks, some of them have Defog. But the thing I think is most important is just how they use their Steel types. Now let's have a look at those types I said. You know, we have Fairy, we have Psychic, we have Flying, we have Ice, we have Dragon, we have Rock. Okay? Corviknight, not an Ice resist, not a Rock resist. Still resists Psychic and Fairy, and it's fighting neutrality, so it's incredibly good against Pokemon like Mega Gardevoir, especially with Mirror Armor to hit back with Mystical Fire, and a good enough Spadef stat and HP to actually be able to eat those hits. However, it's not an Ice resist, not a Rock resist. You can definitely fall flat in some areas because of it. You might be fighting, say, an Arctozolt. Bad example. You might be fighting a Mamoswine, which you still check decently, but Mamoswine can overwhelm Corviknight, just because, you know, it's just able to sit there. I mean, let's be honest, Mamoswine can overwhelm anything, but having that Ice neutrality, especially if you're particularly Ice weak with maybe some other 4x Ice weak mon, like, you know, maybe Sceptile, or, you know, Dragonite's obviously the classic one, as well as Garchomp, and many Dragon Pseudos. Sometimes you just can't really go for Torv. It's an incredibly good mon. I mean, natural recovery, defog, U-turn, you know, it's really good at what it does. Bulk up sets, iron defense sets, taunt, you know, whatever you want. But sometimes it doesn't fit. Let's look at Excadrill, a much more offensive mon than a lot of these I've listed. Super good ability in Sand Rush and Mold Breaker, depending on what team you're using. Ability to both spin rocks away as well as set its own. Incredibly high attack stat. But let's look at resistances. It's not an Ice resist. It's not a Grass resist, though that's generally not too bad to worry about. But it is a 4x Rock resist. And that is quite nice, you know? Being a 4x Rock resist means it takes basically nothing on entry. You can always pretty much run leftovers here instead of boots on a Rapid Spin mon, which is very nice. It gives you a lot more longevity while not having to spin. And it means, you know, you can run, you know, whatever you want in your last slots. And instead of just worrying about being purely utility, Drill's able to just be very offensive. Obviously, pure utility sets exist, you know, something like this. Maybe replace one of these moves with Iron Head. Drill's a great utility mon, Drill's a great offensive mon, Drill's just a great mon overall. But sometimes that Ice neutrality, again, just can be a tough one. So then we just get to, you know, raw Steel type. What about Melmetal? And I like Melmetal. I think people sometimes draft Melmetal expecting it to be this broken breaker that just kills everything. Steel type's not that good on offensive typing. If we go here, you know, it's resisted by electric, fire, steel, water. It's resisted by steel itself. So, you're generally not going to be able to just break through a team on your own. It has decent coverage, but I think it's not meant to be a solid breaker, it's meant to be a really good, just bulkier mon. I think, honestly, its best item is usually leftovers for you. There's definitely matchups where the choice band exists, but I equally think that something like leftovers protect, with such a huge amount of bulk, I mean, seriously, 135, 143 is kind of nuts. It's near enough, like, blissy levels of spadef. Obviously, it's not actually competing with it. I mean, blissy's blissy, but you know, it definitely gets close, and that's kind of impressive on a mon that still has such a good offensive presence, even without a choice band. Double Iron Bash is insane. You completely ruin any mon slower than you just because of a 51% flinch chance. It has the coverage it needs with moves like Thunder Punch, moves like High Horsepower and EQ, and moves like Ice Punch as well for something like Landorus. And Toxic, which is surprisingly useful on it. I think, you know, it's a mon that kind of appreciates something like Toxic, because it's a mon that can stay around for a while. It's definitely similar to Ferrothorn, but Ferrothorn has Leech Seed. And while I do think, you know, Ferrothorn is nice, Ferrothorn's not an Ice Resist. And then all of a sudden, and Ferrothorn's not a Flying Resist either. So then you're left with that kind of situation where, you know, Man-Metal resists everything you want your Steel type to. It comes in on every single mon you think your Steel type wants to come in on. But is there any other mons that can do that? And yeah, actually, there's quite a few other Steel type combinations that are able to do it, such as Steel Psychic. I've got Jirachi here. I think it's definitely the best of the Steel Psychics. Metagross and Bronzino are, of course, incredible as well. Jirachi, similarly to the rest of them, have had some sort of removal or just general hazards game thing with rocks. It has Wish to heal itself back up. Serene Grace is an incredible ability, especially on a mon with Stab, Iron Head, access to Body Slam, etc. Jirachi's incredibly good, incredibly useful. It's not a mon that actually has to rely on Serene Grace, like, entirely. I mean, I don't think any of the Serene Grace mons really do, but it's just good to have a mon that just, you know, you can just go for an Iron Head flinch, because it's bulky enough to just go for one and not really care. You know, it can run a lot of speed, it still has incredibly good natural bulk. You can just, like, you know, do something like that, you know, whatever. Just, you're a bulky Steel who has every single Steel resist you want, and at the same time, you're a Psychic type, so you're neutral to fighting. You know, you have the added Dark and Ghost weaknesses, which is annoying, but, you know, it's fine, because you have such a good coverage, such good cleric abilities with both Wish and Healing Wish, ability to heal yourself back up. You know, it's incredible, mon. Jirachi. And a lot of times I think people who don't like the Steels they draft sometimes should try to give Jirachi a go. It's not just a Scarfer, it's not just this, like, I don't know, Media Beam, whatever, mon. It's a really good mixture of offense and defense on one mon. And that's just what hundreds in every stat does for a mon. Then you get to Empoleon. Empoleon's cool. It's still a Flying Resist, still a Psychic Resist, still a Fairy Resist, still a Rock Resist, still an Ice Resist, I think I said already. Dragon. The only thing it sacrifices here is Grass, which is not bad at all. But Grass Resist on a Steel type, as I've said before, isn't really necessary. Empoleon gets the very nice privilege of having Defog and Rocks in a set. You can choose which one you want to bring each week, if not both, though, I mean, both's a bit weird. Raw's very good, extra utility for it, Knockoff's great. Very strong offensively as well, with, you know, very good Spadef, decent Fizdef. It's able to do a lot. Oftentimes it has to run a Resist Berry because the lack of innate recovery on it is kind of hurtful. However, Leftovers is still just a great item. Has opportunity for Defiant sets. Empoleon is definitely a defensive Steel that can be run offensive. I've run offensive when I've been using it in ISL. Surf's a really good move. Hydro Pump's a really good move. Hydro Cannon, that's a banger of a move, really. I wouldn't recommend it all the time, but if there is something you need to do with Empoleon that requires Tauren and Hydro Cannon, you know, I mean, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. So these three here are great Steel types to do what Steel types do. What about great mons that are just Steel types? You know, you have Scizor. Scizor is the Ice Resist still. However, it's no longer Flying Resist. So, what do you think about that? You know, if you need a Flying Resist, Scizor's not doing it. But if you don't care about Flying Resist, if you have, you know, a solid rock type on your team, like Rhyperior with solid rock, you know, you might be thinking, okay, I can go Scizor. You know, it's fighting neutral. I mean, it only has one weakness, it's fire. It's kind of good typing, and it's a really good mon. It's got default, it's got natural recovery. It's obviously got SD sets, it's got everything. I mean, you know how good Mega Scizor is. It's one of the best steel types in the format. But sometimes it doesn't fit. Sometimes you need that flying resist. But if you don't need that flying resist, then Scizor, you know, is great. When you have Mawile, Mawile's another good one. I mean, it doesn't really give up any of her resistances. And Mawile's another mon that's just really good as a steel. It has rocks, but generally it tends to be a lot more offensive than the other ones. Its bulk is decent, but the HP really makes it lacking. Mawile is definitely probably the most offensive mon on this list, you know, even more so than Excadrill. So the reason I haven't lumped it with the other, you know, pure steals, as I'll call them, is just because it doesn't have the bulk to do so much. I mean, its bulk is great for an offensive mon, don't get me wrong, 125 defense, you're able to eat a couple hits. Intimidate, great to let it eat a couple more. But you know, you're not really running rocks on this a lot. I mean, you can, because it threatens stuff out so much, but that's the thing, it threatens stuff out. It's not that you're taking a hit to get rocks up, you're forcing them to think they're gonna take a hit. You know, it has Player of Ironhead as its coverage, you know, along with good moves, Fire Fang, Ice Punch, Thunder Punch. No Thunder Fang, which is always struck me as just a little sad, but I know it does have Thunder Fang, it just doesn't recommend it. Either way, I mean, Mawile is obviously incredible mon, but it's not always an incredible steel or an incredible fairy for what you might want them to do. It's not the bulkiest in, you know, either stat. I mean, defense is fine, but you still have to mega beforehand. A normal Mawile, you know, as much as it's nice, it kind of has to invest a lot in its bulk to actually be useful as a bulky mon, even with Intimidate support. You know, it's kind of rough. Then we get to Aegislash, which is honestly a big favourite of mine. Aegislash, I could put with the other pure steels, but I think it's a little different. If we go to the steel thing here, we can see that, where is it? Normal steel, electric steel, and ghost steel are type of most resistances, having 12 resistances each, although there are apparently no normal steel Pokemon. Either way, Aegislash has the most resistances physically possible. It has every steel resist, you know, none of these are cancelled out, as well as the fighting immunity and normal immunity. Now, why is this good? Well, Aegislash is a very interesting mon. You know, playing it right, you essentially have your stat spread's essentially 60, 140, 140, 140, 140, 60. You're like wishy-washy. Wishy-washy school, but better, because you have more speed, more HP, and then more defense and Spadef. And before it used to be 150 in every set. That was when King's Shield was broken, and it's incredible how just slight nerfs can make a Pokemon go from clearly Ubers to, you know, just about balanced. It's still an incredible mon. Don't get me wrong, you know, those mild nerfs aren't going to stop it from doing what it does, but, you know, it still has taken it down a peg. What does Aegislash do? It does just about everything. It's one of a few mons here that has no effect on the Hazard's game, no rocks, no default, nothing. Instead, it uses its own bulk as just a very good pivot into a lot of attacks. I mean, seriously, there's 18 types, you're resisting or immune to 12 of them. You're weak to Fire and Ground and Dark and Ghost, which generally just means you're weak to Fire and Ground and Dark. Being weak to Ghost usually isn't too big of a problem, because, I mean, you're taking the best Ghost in the format, so, you know, that's good. Aegislash is great, you know, obviously it has these bulkier sets with, like, Toxic King Shield, it has SD with Balloon. I can't spell. It has these autonomized weakness policy sets with base 60 speed definitely being fast enough. Same reason you can run on Celesteela, a mon I haven't mentioned here because I think it falls under a similar boat to Corviknight in terms of not being an ice resist, but Celesteela is a little different, so I might talk about it after. Equally, it just has its incredibly good specs and choice band sets. Specs being generally considered the most threatening, just because of how hard it is to switch into Shadow Ball, and still being able to run close combat just because of how insane Aegislash's stats are. I mean, seriously. On a spec set, which would generally be something like this, you have what is essentially 600 special attack with Shadow Balls, Flash Cannons, and then about like 350 attack for CC and Shadow Sneak. Aegislash has weaknesses, of course. I think its Dark weakness can definitely come to bite it sometimes, especially when facing a team with a lot of knockoffs, a team with a lot of foul play users, especially Pokemon like Mandibuzz, but Aegislash always has a way around it. But is this what you want from your Steel type? Do you want your Steel type to be this incredibly powerful offensive breaker that can get through just about everything? And I mean, I think that's fine. I think it's, you know, a really good Steel type, but for others they might be thinking, no, I need something like a Jirachi, like a Corviknight, like a Scizor, that's much more always about bulk than just having good bulk and being able to switch in. But others might be like, oh yeah, I love Aegislash, I love Drill, you know, I love Melmetal, I wish I could use them more. Then we get to a couple Steel types which I think people hate on a little, for reasons that I understand, but it's still sad. So let's have a look at Cobalion. Cobalion is an interesting mon. It is fast, it has high defense, it has high enough HP and attack, special attack. It's got Rock's Volt Switch, and the Steel Fighting type. Now offensively, the Steel Fighting type is good, and it is also a 4x Rock Resist. But a lot of people don't like about Cobalion is what the Fighting type does for its Psychic and Fairy resist, as well as its Flying resist. These three, losing those three types, ignore what you just saw, losing those three type resistances is kind of big. I think people can justify losing the Ice Resist and Rock Resist on Steel Flyings, because they'll try to make it up somewhere. Maybe they'll go double Steel, maybe they'll do something else. A lot of people can say, okay, I'll give up, you know, like, the Grass Resist, because it's really easy to give up. They can give up the Psychic Resist, but maybe not the Fairy Resist. They can give up the Flying Resist, but none of the others. And then you get Cobalion, which is giving up Flying, Fairy, and Psychic. I still think Cobalion is a good mon. Why is that? Because Cobalion is a very strange mon. And I think it's a mon that people can underestimate sometimes. It's neutral to these moves, sure, but it's gonna live the hit. It's a mon that's faster than a lot of others, with access to SD, with access to stuff like Volt Switch. It can become a bulky, fast pivot, which is a very weird niche that it kind of takes on its own. Other mons that really do this are kind of lacking. You have to deal with something like Coco, for example, with Roost, something like Crobat, Talonflame, but even these are kind of stretching it just with recovery. Cobalion is able to take these hits incredibly well, and it doesn't always need to come in on resisted hit. Really, by the time you get to another one of these fast but bulky mons, I mean, I would argue would be coming down to something like a bulky Infernape at the same speed tier, which is able to do it with Slack Off as well. Like, there's really nothing else that does what it does, which is really cool. And I think so anyway. It's a very cool niche to have. Its SD sets are very good late game, but as a Steel type, I mean, a lot of people can't convince themselves to take it, which I understand. It's the same situation with Lucario. I mean, Lucario is very much a HO mon for draft, because it doesn't have the defensive utility people need. Celesteela is another mon I'm going to talk about now, because I kind of forgot to put it on the list, because it's a very long list. Celesteela is another Steel Flying type, which has Leech Seed and Protect, as its main recovery options. The combination of Leech Seed and Protect can heal you about 36% every 2 turns, which is pretty nice, especially considering the fact you can be Leech Seeding something with more HP than you, pardon me, and then start to heal a lot more. Celesteela has what a lot of these other bulky mons don't, is incredibly good coverage. You know, Corviknight has Flying, Fighting, to an extent Dark with Power Trip, Steel, and Bug. Meanwhile, Celesteela has its dual stabs, both physically and specially, although, I mean, Acrobatics isn't the best for most situations. You have EQ, you have Energy Ball Data Drain, you have Flamethrower, Flame Charge, you have, obviously, Rock Slide as well, Stone Edge, Zen Headbutt, Superpower. There's so many moves. Mega Horn? Like, seriously. And then, I mean, even some more niche ones, like Brutal Swing you might need for something. I mean, I doubt you do ever, but you can run Ingrain with Leech Seed Protect. It's a great mon just because of how much of its coverage it has. It can run very offensive sets with Autotomize. It can run these leftovers Leech Seed sets. It can do a lot. But it's not an Ice Resist, and it's not a Rock Resist. And sometimes you need it, and sometimes you just can't draw Celesteela. Celesteela is also weird because, I mean, it is just a weird Pokemon in general. It's good offensively, but not great. It's great offensively, but not insane. It's great defensively. Actually, I'd say it's insane defensively. But it's weird, you know? It's kind of in that mix. You know? And what about offensive steals? What about Kartana? Kartana's weird. Kartana's a lot like Drill. Just because it has good enough bulk stats. I mean, it's 131 defense. Literally the same as Ferrothorn right here. But obviously it's lacking the HP, it's lacking actually putting investment in. It's lacking Leech Seed recovery, though it can run Synthesis. What Kartana is pretty much just a HO mon. It's a great Scarfer, great choice band user, great at SD late game. It's a mon that can just get off the ground and immediately start running. You know, it's kind of the Usain Bolt of steel types. It's just a huge snowball, but sometimes teams need their steel type to not just be an offensive one, because steel type as an offensive typing isn't very good. I mean, it hits fairies, hits ice, hits rock, but let's consider it, ice types have never been good defensively, rock types have never been that good defensively, and so then you're stuck with hitting fairies. And as much as I like hitting fairies, and as much as Kartana definitely has the coverage to do what, you know, every sweeper wants, which is just kill an entire team as soon as it hits the field, it's kind of, you know, steel type isn't helping it, you kind of want another one, it's a little awkward. Ferrothorn's my last one, I think I'm going to talk about. It's a mon that gives up the ice resist, you know, we've seen this before, it gives up the bug resist as well, gives up the flying resist, which is kind of the biggest one out of the three, I mean, arguably. You know, some teams are weak to ice, some teams are weak to flying. Flying spam is really good, but seen rarely. Ice types are generally just restricted to Weavile, Kyurem, and Mamoswine at this point, as well as a couple low tiers. I know Hail Calls have definitely been more popular lately. So Ferrothorn is, as a steel type, kind of weak to those. You know, it's an incredible mon, don't get me wrong, I mean, it's kind of, it's been Uber's viable since its generation, that's how bulky it is. Leech Seed, Protect, very similar to Celesteela, however, with knockoff access, which is really good for it, as well as Thunder Wave, as well as Toxic. You know, it's there's a lot that Ferrothorn does. Iron Barbs is an incredible ability for it. You can run Helmet, as all of a sudden just start doing insane contact damage, while being neutral to Steel, neutral to Bug even. U-turns still don't do much damage to you, so you're able to switch in on them a lot. You're able to just switch in on a lot of physical hits as Ferrothorn and just get Iron Barbs racked up really quickly. But sometimes you can't draft Ferrothorn or Ferroseed because you need that Ice Resist, because you need that Flying Resist, you need that Bug Resist. I mean, you know, there's some teams that might need a Bug Resist. So, what does this really say? What is, you know, what are steel types really? They're good mons. But there's never an always correct option. Steel types are very much specific to your team. I think a Fairy Dragon Steel core is always going to be incredibly good, both offensively and defensively. Mainly defensively, though. And it's very much a core that you want to consider on both bulky offense teams and balanced teams. But on these super offensive teams, and on some weirder teams, you can definitely just make your steel types, a little worse, a little different. You don't always have to be going for these big boys like Corviknight, or Melmetal, or Jirachi. You can go for your Empoleons, your Tartanas. You can go for your Berserkers if you want, There's a whole wide array of very nice, but niche steel types. Also, Metagross is here, which is just kind of nice. But a lot of these mons are great, but they give up something that you might not want to give up. Flying resist, Clefty's kind of dumb, and it's not too bulky. The flying resist, the psychic resist, the fairy resist. Berserker, And then some of them don't give up resist, but might just be too weak to something. Probopass is 4 times weak to ground. That's kind of rough. Steelix is weak to water with barely any SPDF or HP. Kind of rough. Major Steelix kind of alleviates that, but still. Long Sandslash is 4 times weak to fire and 4 times weak to fighting. It's kind of, there's a lot of these steel types that, because steel is weak to the 2 most normal, 2 most common physical offensive types, and then also fire, just means that a lot of these type combinations do just start to overlap. Ground is super effective against, I think, 5 types? Is it 5? I think it's that broken. Yeah, it is. And fighting is super effective against 5 as well. Even among, as I said, Electric Steel is the most resistant type possible. Magnezone is very hard to fit because it's 4 times weak to ground. Also because it's not exactly a defensive one either, but, that's besides the point. I think Magnezone is cool. But Magnezone isn't really a steel type. Magnezone is a very weird breaker / utility mon that doesn't do what a usual steel type does, but still kind of can. It's weird. I think Magnezone is great, though. I think a lot of steel types are just great because the steel type is so great. And that's the thing, I feel like as much as you can be quite sad with your steel types, a lot of the time you're just going to be like, okay, well, it's steel, it just kind of resists a lot. Sometimes you might need an ice resist, sometimes you might need a 4 times ice resist and you go Heatran, or Empoleon, for example. Sometimes you need that flying resist, sometimes you need that 4 times flying resist, and you actually have to go a steel rock type. Which generally would just boil down to, okay, let me get Stack Attacker, because I don't want to take Bastiodon, Probopass, or Aggron. Rip my boys, but I hate to say it. Sometimes you need something else. Sometimes you need a 4 times, whatever resist, Sometimes you need a billion times Psychic resist, just go Bishop. 4 times Steel resist, go Empoleon. 4 times Fairy resist, go something else. I don't know. I can't think of the other type. Steel Poison, do they even exist? No. But Heatran exists. Heatran is the master of, do I need a 4 times resist to something? Go Heatran. And I think that's it. All these ones are very different. All these ones are very good. What steel type do you want? Who knows? You'll just know when you know. I think steel types are very fine to build around. Building around some of these is definitely easier than a lot of the others. I think the easiest to build around for sure is Aegislash. It's definitely one you could go first round and feel confident about it. I think the rest of these mons you could go first round, but are a lot more filler. Melmetal can fit on quite a few teams, as long as the team is generally bulkier, though you could also just make a Melmetal team focused around its offensive presence. Corv is definitely a round 2 pick. It's really good, but you're never picking it round 1. Jirachi is a little weird. Jirachi doesn't get picked up too much, which I'm always surprised by. Jirachi is just insanely good. As much as I don't... I guess it's because I understand. I don't really like using it too much, but even then, I understand why it's so good. Sizzle's a mon you can build your team around. Major Mor's team, mon you can build your team around. But you know, these are the more offensive steals that have slightly less defensive utility, which you're going to cover up with the rest of your team. So if you need your steel type to do that, then, you know, you're going to do Heatran round 2 or 3, Corviknight round 2 or 3, Ferrothorn round 2 or 3, and that's kind of it. That's just how steel types work, and steel types are great. I might do another one for fairy types, but I don't really like fairy types. They smell. Might do one for dragons, but I hate every dragon below tier 1, so they smell. Seriously, I mean, as soon as you get past this, these are the only dragons I think I'd ever like drafting. I mean, I like low tier dragons, but I might do another one on water types. Water types are cool, though. I like water types a lot, because there's a huge discrepancy, between Gren and Pelipper and Slow, like, you know, huge discrepancy there. Fire types are cool, but they're a little weird. I mean, a lot of them are just offensive, so defensive fire types that you find are generally very coveted. Mons like Heatran, Mons like, to an extent, Victini, but not really. To an extent, Infernape, but not really. Mainly stuff like Moltres, stuff like Arcanine, Centiskorch, etc. And then grass types are grass types. You know, these OU in Nat Dex grass types are here just because, I mean, they kind of get to cheat. Grass type's a weird type. It's not very good offensively. So these mons have 180 attack, have stab priority that's just about as strong as a Yveltal Sucker Punch, get to click Nasty Plot of 130 base power, get to have every stat that they need above 100, and their AV be the best AV runner in the game, and then be Ferrothorn. Either way, though, yeah, steel types are good, steel types are great, and you should always be highly considerate of other people's steel types, just so you can draft your own.